Hello everyone, welcome to the PPL. Today we're going to go over how to tissue paper a wing. Tissue papering is a pretty easy and effective process to cover smaller components of an aircraft wing. Predominantly for our aircraft in here, you either use a monocoat or a tissue paper. Tissue paper is something I would definitely recommend for smaller control surfaces like a tail or elevator. We have some examples here. It's a simple, essentially arts and crafts project that you can work on, but it takes a little bit longer than a traditional monocoat would. Some benefits of tissue paper is that it's very light, it's easy to attach. Monocoat is a little bit harder of a learning process. If you get a hole in it, it's easy to patch. Right here we have a hole. We were able to put tissue paper back onto the surface area, it's easy to attach. And it does hold form pretty well. Compared to a monocoat, I would say you wouldn't put tissue paper on something like a wing, or at least to cover the entire wing. It can be done, but it's just a long process, and it's not as effective in strength as you go throughout the wing. But for something like a tail or elevator surface, it's pretty simple. Okay, so to get started, you need the piece that you're going to attach the tissue paper onto, your tissue paper piece, an X-Acto knife, a cup that you're going to mix glue and water in, a standard glue stick. We just use Standard's Elmer's glue in here, and a spray water bottle. You use a paintbrush to apply the glue, a cutting board, and then moving over here we have scissors, paper towels, and then a wax paper. So to get started, I'll move my wax paper over, and we're simply gonna just apply a coat of the glue stick along the wood. And before we get started for that, generally for your tissue paper piece, you're gonna wanna cut something that holds similar dimensions to your piece. You wanna have a little bit of overhang that you can cut off later with an X-Acto knife. And a quick note on tissue paper, it might be pretty hard to tell, but it does have a grain direction essentially. So if I try to tear this way, it's less clean of a tear, it doesn't go straight. If I tear this way, however, it is easy and it goes pretty much straight. So what you want to do once you cut out your tissue paper is to make sure the grain direction follows the longest part of your piece. So that's what we have here. It just makes the bonding easier once it gets water sprayed onto it. But first we'll just quickly apply glue to all parts of the surface to get that initial adherence. And then we will begin to mix the rest of our glue and water mixture. Try to keep some tension in the tissue paper as you place it on. If it has some wrinkles, that's okay. They will be eliminated once you put water on over the top. But once you apply, wait a couple minutes, let the bond seal, and then you'll move on to the rest of your gluing process. So now we're gonna mix together our Elmer's glue and water mixture. I try to use about a 50-50 ratio. It doesn't need to be exact. Again, this is kind of just an arts and crafts ordeal, but I'm just gonna dump a little bit of Elmer's glue into there and take some water from the spray bottle. I'll mix it up with just the back of our paintbrush. And then we're gonna start to apply to the rest of our now dried tissue paper. Essentially the same thing as the glue stick now. I'm going to apply the glue only to the actual wooden parts of the surface area. It doesn't need to be a super heavy coat, but I'm just gonna do a nice light application across the entirety of the structure. A quick note, primarily in the lab we use water and glue, but I've seen online and we've tried in the lab people using isopropyl alcohol as well. Both are very effective mixtures. It could be up to your discretion, but it is also an effective process. So once the glue's applied, the most ideal situation is that you'll wait until it fully dries itself. However, if you have time constraints, we do have heat guns in the lab. So if you want, plug it into an outlet, and lightly run it over to help expedite the heating process. That works too. Typically what we'll do with our glue application is we'll let the glue dry. We'll then hit it with a spray bottle, let that dry, and then typically do one more glue application. So if that drying time is something that you can't have in your build, a heat gun is a good option to help speed it up.
Go.
So now that our glue and water mixture is dry, I'm just gonna quickly spray on some water onto the tissue paper to help get some of the wrinkles out. Doesn't need to be a huge amount, just keep the tissue paper damp. So that's a good enough amount. Then we're gonna let that dry before we apply another coat of our glue and water mixture. Okay, so our tissue paper piece is now dried onto our part. Now if you want, this is almost an iterative process, so if you want, you can go back over the surface area using your same glue and water mixture, and then using our spray bottle to get wrinkles off the piece. With the way that the piece looks right now, I'm happy with it, so I'm going to now cut out the perimeter of the tissue paper, and then we should be done with this part. So to cut, typically it's tissue paper, it's pretty easy. I'll use an X-Acto knife just to trim around the perimeter. Ideally you want to keep it precise because it is fragile, but it's not too hard to cut. So usually I just flip it around and lightly trace the shape. Okay, so I just finished cutting up the last parts of the tissue paper off. So now I have a fully tissue papered tail. Like I said at the start of this video, it's a pretty easy process. It's just a little bit iterative and it takes a little bit of patience, but the actual action of doing it is quite easy. One last thing I want to mention is just the idea of patching it. So if inevitably something happens and a rip or tear in the tissue paper occurs, it is pretty easy to patch. For example, we had a hole here in this wing, so all I did was cut out another tissue paper that would fit onto the surface area, so these ribs and spars. I clear cut all the tissue paper out of the square to make room for the wood, reattached my glue, and then put over this glue water mixture and sprayed, and it fits on perfectly. So patching it, again, is not super hard to do if your shape stays easy. But yeah, it's a nice feasible way. It just is gonna take a little bit more time than a monocoat. But other than that, that's all there is for tissue papering. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask or come by the PPL. We have lots of examples and stuff, or if you guys wanna come do demo it yourself, feel free. But yeah, that's all there is for tissue papering. Thanks.